In the 19th century, Dr. Alexander is an associate professor at Columbia University specializing in applied mechanics and engineering. One day, while he is absorbed in his lectures and research, his friend David arrives to remind him that he is late for a date. Alexander hurriedly gathers his things and runs home. On the way, he vents his frustration to David about the university's lack of support for his ideas. David says his theories are too radical and advises him to try something more practical instead. When Alexander reaches home, his housekeeper Mrs. Watchett gives him clean clothes and he prepares for his date. Alexander meets his girlfriend Emma at the park, where she is ice skating. He jokingly says he is sick and that the only cure is for her to marry him. Then he proposes with a beautiful ring, and Emma happily accepts. At that moment, an armed robber appears and demands their belongings. Alexander hands over his wallet and watch, but the robber also wants the ring. When they resist, a struggle breaks out. Alexander tries to grab the gun, but the robber fires, hitting Emma. As the robber runs away, Alexander holds Emma as she dies in his arms, devastated and helpless. 4 years later, Alexander has shut himself inside his home, spending his days obsessively trying to solve an equation. David visits him and urges him to return to normal life, reminding him that he cannot change the past. But Alexander disagrees and only asks David to believe in him, insisting he can change everything. David notices something hidden behind the curtains and asks about it. Alexander promises to show him at dinner a week later. 1 week afterward, dressed in a new suit, Alexander pulls back the curtain to reveal a massive machine. He sits inside, places Emma's necklace into the central mechanism, and prepares to activate it. When he starts the machine, time begins to slow, then reverse. It is revealed that Alexander has built a time machine. Using it, he returns to 4 years earlier to save Emma. When he sees Emma again, he embraces and kisses her, taking her away from the park and telling her to stay home tonight, promising he will come back later. Emma agrees with a playful smile and asks him to bring her flowers. Alexander runs to the shop across the street, but while he is gone, Emma is struck by a vehicle and dies. At the hospital, as David sits beside him, a shattered Alexander realizes he cannot change Emma's fate. Determined, he decides to travel into the future instead, hoping to find a way to overcome destiny. He returns home, climbs into his machine, and journeys to the year 2030. As the world rapidly transforms around him, Emma's necklace falls from the machine and instantly decays into dust the moment it touches the ground. When he arrives in 2030, he stops the machine and sees that humanity has colonized the moon, believing he might find answers there. He visits a library and encounters Vox, a holographic artificial intelligence. Despite having no physical presence, Vox's existence fascinates Alexander. He asks Vox questions about physics and temporal paradoxes, and Vox answers everything. But when Alexander asks about time machines, Vox accesses the science fiction archive and explains that time travel has not yet been invented. Vox adds that once, a man named Alexander claimed to have created a time machine, but it was never proven. He has no idea that the Alexander standing before him is that very man. Disappointed by the lack of answers, Alexander decides to travel even farther into the future. He jumps a few more years ahead and stops the machine when he sees the library in ruins. Stepping out to observe the year 2037, the moment he sets foot outside, he notices the moon slowly falling toward Earth. Firefighters mistake him for an ordinary civilian and try to evacuate him, but Alexander slips from their grasp and rushes back to his machine, attempting to escape further into the future. A massive explosion erupts, knocking him unconscious as the machine continues to propel him forward with the lever stuck in place. When he finally wakes, he realizes he has traveled hundreds of thousands of years into the future, stopping the machine somewhere around the year 800,000. During the journey, he witnesses Earth undergoing dramatic transformations, evolutionary shifts, ice ages, continental drift, and even desertification. He loses consciousness again. Upon waking, he finds several women standing over him, helping him recover. The next morning, as he gets dressed, he notices a small child, Kaylin, watching him. The boy quickly runs off, and Alexander follows him, soon discovering an impressive cliffside community carved into rock. Humanity has returned to a simpler existence, living through hunting, gathering, and fishing. Alexander meets the people but struggles to understand their language. Kaylin's sister, Mara, can speak English and explains that English is now known as Lex, an old, unused language she learned as a child but barely remembers. When she asks where he comes from, Alexander explains he is from the past. Mara translates, and the entire community bursts into laughter, thinking he is joking. But suddenly, the crowd disperses as night approaches. Mara explains they must prepare. That evening, she tells him their people are called the Eli. As a gesture of gratitude, Alexander gives his watch to Kalin. That night, he notices the moon has shattered into pieces, just as he saw in 2037. He falls asleep and dreams of a pale man with glowing blue eyes. At the same moment, Kalin wakes from a nightmare screaming. Mara comforts him and tells Alexander that the Morlocks he mentioned are nothing more than nightmares all children experience. She explains that everyone here shares the same recurring dream. The notion unsettles Alexander, but he eventually falls asleep again. The next morning, Mara leads him to the ruins of New York. Alexander is stunned to see the remnants of famous buildings. She asks why he traveled to the future, and he admits he wants to understand why he could not change the past, why fate seems immutable. Later they take a boat onto the water. Alexander asks why there are no elderly people among them. Mara quietly replies that they are all gone. Before he can question further, she takes him to a memorial dedicated to the elders. Then she shows him the time machine and desperately asks if he can take Kalin back to his time. Before Alexander can respond, a loud horn echoes across the valley. Mara immediately runs toward the memorial to find Kalin. Together they try to flee into the forest but are pursued by enormous creatures, the Morlocks. Alexander is horrified at the sight of them. The Morlocks fire dart-like projectiles and capture many Eli. Mara is struck by one, but Alexander quickly pulls the dart out. The Morlocks drag several people underground into tunnels hidden beneath the sand. Alexander then sees a Morlock chasing Kalin and drives it back. The creature redirects its attention toward Alexander, who climbs a windmill-like structure. The Morlock leaps and grabs his leg, but Alexander kicks it off. It tries again, grabbing hold as both of them crash to the ground. At that moment, Kalin arrives with a burning torch. The Morlock recoils at the flames and retreats completely when another horn sounds in the distance. Alexander and Kalin chase after it, but soon they hear Mara's desperate screams. Alexander watches helplessly as Mara is dragged across the sand and pulled underground by a Morlock. He tries to save her, digging frantically, but she disappears beneath the earth before he can reach her. Desperate, he turns to Torin, the leader of the Eli, begging for help, but Torin refuses. They have accepted this life, he says, and they never pursue the Morlocks. Left with no choice, Alexander turns to Kalin and asks where the Morlocks have taken Mara. Kalin hesitates. Alexander encourages him, telling the boy they must fight if they want to save her. Finally, Kalin admits that they never speak of the place, but he knows where the ghosts can be found. Kalin leads Alexander to the ruins of the New York Library, where Vox is still functioning. The Eli call him a ghost. Vox explains that humanity eventually split into two evolutionary paths, those who remained on the surface and those who descended underground. Alexander is shocked that Vox knows this despite never receiving updates. Vox clarifies that an Eli once escaped the Morlocks and spent years telling him about their world. Vox then tells Alexander to head east, where the Morlocks dwell. Guided by Vox's information, Alexander and Kalin travel east and eventually discover the entrance to the Morlocks' lair. Alexander tells Kalin he will go inside alone and instructs him to light a fire near the entrance so he can find his way back. But when Kalin realizes he has lost the watch Alexander gave him, Alexander is puzzled, wondering how primitive Morlocks could understand concepts like time or clocks. Then he turns and descends into the tunnel. Deep below, he discovers a massive underground city that the Morlocks have built over millennia. Each Morlock has a specific role in their society. Alexander accidentally falls into a pit filled with human bones and is quickly captured. They drag him into a chamber where he finds Mara imprisoned in a cage. There he comes face to face with the leader of the Morlocks, the Uber Morlock. The Uber Morlock explains that after the moon shattered, most humans sought refuge underground because the surface had become uninhabitable. Some survivors remained above ground, but those who descended adapted to the darkness over thousands of years, becoming vulnerable to sunlight. Over time, a caste-like hierarchy emerged. Some Morlocks evolved into large, powerful hunters, while others, like himself, developed heightened mental abilities. He reveals that he can control the minds of all Morlocks, which is why the Eli share the same recurring nightmare. To them, the Eli are nothing but livestock. Those deemed suitable, like Mara, are used as breeding vessels. When the Uber Morlock turns, Alexander sees that his brain extends down into his spine, a physical testament to his evolved psychic power. Alexander condemns his methods, but the Uber Morlock coldly states that nobody can question 800,000 years of evolution. The Uber Morlock then uses his psychic power to pull Alexander toward him, mocking the irony of a time traveler who tries to change fate but can never alter anything. He explains that he can read human minds, which is why he already knows everything about Alexander. Then he manipulates Alexander's thoughts, showing him a vision of the life he would have had if he had succeeded in saving Emma. Inside the hallucination, Alexander sees Emma alive with their 2 children, living a peaceful life. But the Uber Morlock abruptly ends the vision. He explains that Alexander built the time machine to prevent Emma's death, yet if Emma had lived, he never would have created the device in the first place. It forms an unbreakable loop. Emma must die in every reality. This, he says, is fate. The Uber Morlock admits that he himself exists only because of Alexander's choices. Then he returns the machine to him and tells him to leave. Alexander climbs into the time machine but stops to ask for his watch. In that instant, he yanks the Uber Morlock into the machine with him, and the two begin to struggle as it starts up. The Uber Morlock gains the upper hand and tries to throw Alexander out, but Alexander ruptures a steam pipe, scalding the creature. They fight violently until Alexander manages to push the Uber Morlock out of the machine. The creature claws at his throat, nearly dragging him out as well, but with one final effort, Alexander pulls the lever. Time accelerates uncontrollably, causing the Uber Morlock's body to rapidly age, decay and disintegrate into dust. Only his hand remains on Alexander's chest. Alexander stops the machine in the year 635,000, finding the Morlock lands reduced to a barren desert. Determined to change what remains of the future, he returns to the Morlock's tunnels. He rescues Mara and jams his watch into the gears of the time machine, forcing it to run continuously. With the machine unable to shut down, it traps the remaining Morlocks inside. Alexander and Mara flee, but Morlock fires a dart at him. Mara kills the attacker and helps Alexander escape the collapsing underground city. The remaining Morlocks pursue them, but Alexander and Mara emerge just in time. The time machine explodes moments later, destroying the Morlock civilization entirely. The Eli gather and witness the end of their ancient enemy. Days later, Vox begins teaching Eli children about the lost world of the past. Alexander shows Mara and Kaelin the place where his home once stood. In 1899, 1 week after their dinner arrangement, David visits Alexander's house. Mrs. Watchett tells him Alexander has gone. David hopes his friend has finally found happiness and a place to call home. And indeed, Alexander has found a new life, one where he can help shape the future of the Eli. Even though he destroyed the time machine, his only way back, he has freed the Eli from the deadly Morlocks and perhaps will build something better than the world he left behind.